Okay, so here we are. 2 months together now. And so far you've had all the obligatory must-have sermons. You've had the first, don't worry about change, don't throw things at me sermon. Then you had Mother's Day and Father's Day. Then you had the Bishop installation sermon. Then you had the flu Sunday, and then the following flu sermon. And then you had Youth Sunday, and here we are. I feel like the first couple of months at a church are kind of like being in a boat when you're first pulling out. At first there's things to guide by. You have to avoid ships, you have to avoid this area here, and then you're out. And then you go a little bit further, and then you have to avoid the islands. And then suddenly you open your eyes and open ocean. And if you're like me, you think, oh man, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now that we can do anything? And this is something in writing circles that's known as blank page syndrome. It's where you have all these great ideas and then you sit down at your computer and you see that darn cursor accusatorily blinking at you and you don't know quite how to say it. But here we are, new pastor and church, in the midst of the vast sea of Pentecost season. Now, after giving this vast ocean of all that we can be at First Lutheran a lot of thought, I finally figured out what I want to say. And it's something that I don't think a lot of churches spend time talking about. I want to talk to you about the reality of God. And that might seem strange to say that a lot of churches don't necessarily talk about this. But think about it. How often in church do you actually ask the question, is God real? How do I know that God is real? How do I know that God is real for me? We make a lot of assumptions in a church. I've now had over 100 meetings with different people, and I want to tell you something. You do not all agree. You do not all agree. We need to assume less and question more. So that's why I'd like you to do something now that we don't normally do mid-sermon. I'd like, if you are willing, for you to turn to your neighbor and talk to them, ask them why they think God is real. How do they know God is real? If you're not the kind of person that does this, if you are a good, quiet Lutheran and you're going to stay that way, in your handout, it says discussion question. How do you know God is real? So if you want to not talk to someone, go ahead and just write out what you think there. But otherwise, I want you to take a couple of minutes right now, turn to your neighbor or neighbors, and ask them, how do you know God is real? And then we'll pick back up in just a couple of minutes. When I asked someone if I thought me asking a discussion question mid-sermon was a good idea, they said, I don't know how you're going to get them to stop. Well, good job. Hopefully you continue those conversations.
I wasn't done.
Well, that's right. There's plenty of time. You know, church goes for longer, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be in church. So how many of you heard the usual answer that pastors hear all the time when they ask this question? I don't know, I just do. Is that a fairly common answer? No? You got better answers than that? Well, great. We make a lot of assumptions in church. We pastors and leaders assume that you are all like us. That you, by us I mean me. You're like me. So of course you went to 4 years of undergraduate where you studied God and philosophy and figured it all out. And then of course you went to seminary where you studied the incredibly interesting intricacies of Lutheranism in excruciating detail. And of course you spent every day in a church getting all of this God stuff figured out. So that you'll be like us pastors, who never get confused, never doubt, never get anything wrong. It's okay for you to laugh at that. We need to spend more time talking about how we know God is real. Spending time trying to help people track down this God that so often seems hidden. We need to spend more time trying to experience this God that actually is. How can we smell God, taste God, hear God, feel God in our lives? We need to spend more time discussing what it's like to live out being God. God's work, our hands, is our message. How can we be God's hands for our neighbor? How can we be God? This is what we're going to talk about for the next 3 weeks. Chasing, feeling, becoming. But first, chasing. I still remember it like it was yesterday. That first real faith crisis. This is different than when I gave up God in high school. A faith crisis requires commitment. And I was not committed to my faith in high school. Sorry, youth pastors and confirmation leaders that thought they had me. You didn't. I woke up in the middle of the night in my last year of undergrad, which, if you're doing the math, this means next year I was supposed to go to seminary. And I just felt this fear. It was the kind of fear that you can taste. It's sour and metallic and terrible. You know it if you tasted it. And I suddenly got so angry at this fear that I took my pillow and threw it at the wall, trying to chase it away. There was a spider on the wall. But it didn't go anywhere. It stayed there. It got into my heart. It's this question that I know many of you have uttered at some point in your lives. How do you know? How do you know that when you die there'll be something waiting for you on the other side? How do you know that you're not just telling yourself what you want to hear? And even though I had had moments in the past where I thought, maybe God spoke to me, that evening that I woke up and the following weeks, I found doubt had replaced my certainty. Questions had replaced my answers. How do you really know? How can you be sure? Most of my friends told me to leave it there. Live with uncertainty. That's what it means to be a person in this world. You are uncertain. You don't know about things, so just give up on the quest and accept that you don't know. Now, I'm not that kind of person. I can't let things go. I don't work like that. And I don't think religion should work like that. If you'll, on a big decision, like say buying a car, you'll go out and you'll kick the tires, right? You'll do some research. Or if you're going to buy a new house, you get a house inspection, you talk to a realtor that knows what they're talking about. Why do we not treat religion the same way? Why do we not make sure that every part of our faith is experiential? That we meet God, know God, experience God. And we've had enough people out there in this world that have experienced God to know that this quest isn't impossible. So I did the only thing that I could think of. I went chasing after God. I went seeking to try and grab God and wrangle God out of wherever God was hiding. And so I went and read. I read and I read and I read and I read until I couldn't see straight anymore. I read walking around places. I was constantly reading, trying to find answers. Any book about theology, religion, philosophy, anything, I read. And I talked and talked and talked and listened and listened and listened to priests and rabbis and pastors and imams, anybody, any philosopher, anybody that could possibly give me answers. I went and talked to them. And over the course of this experience, I did come away with a lot of good answers. But it was the bad answers, the wrong words at the wrong time, that really changed me. That became something that I realized the flaw in my quest. As you can imagine, the real thing that was bothering me, the real fear, was death. It's like that old Woody Allen quote, "I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be around when it happens." I was afraid of death. So I thought the best thing to do was to ignore death. Do everything to push it away and never think about it. and I would just focus on God. Leave the fear alone and focus on finding God again. So I decided to skip a lot of classes because avoiding issues of death when you're a religion major is not easy. So I decided to go to the safe class. I went to my film class to get a little cinematic escape. The only problem was that we went and saw the movie Persephone. Now, if you don't know your Greek myths as well as you should, I don't know why you should, but if you don't, Persephone is a figure that had to be sacrificed because her father had angered the gods by shooting some animal or something that he wasn't supposed to. And so she has to be sacrificed, she has to be killed in order to make the gods happy. And Persephone gives this quote as she marches off towards death. "How can I go on to death when I know only dust and shadow remain?" Yikes. When you're afraid of death and you're trying to avoid thinking about death, that is pretty much the last quote that you want to hear. I remember hearing an audible groan from other people in the class that knew what I was going through. My fear was suddenly screaming, and God seemed to have gone silent. So I decided it wasn't safe at school anymore. So I went and hid at my parents' house. It was good, which was fine, worked well. Until I came out one morning, and on the walk in front of me were 3 dead baby birds. No explanation, no cats, no nest, no reason for them to be there, other than it was like they had been placed there horribly just for me to see. It's like my fear was shouting, and God was silent. So I knew what I had to do after that. Obviously, God lives in a church. I've been looking in the wrong places, so I needed to go and find a church. I was going to find and break into a church any way that I could. And luckily, the property manager of this particular church was not this one, but another one, was lax, and the door was unlocked. So I went in. I snuck in, got into the sanctuary, and I kneeled before the altar, and I said, "God, do something. Something big, grand, massive. Make a noise. Have someone walk in. Rip open the ceiling." This is before I knew how much church roofs cost, but rip open the ceiling. Do something to make me know that you are there. Do anything. And I waited. I have never heard a church go that silent. Not a sound of wind, not a creaking board, not a sound. My fear was screaming, and God was silent. I won't recount to you every minor detail of this faith crisis, but just know that there was not a day that went by where I didn't experience some touch of death, some reminder of death, something that made me realize my fear was screaming and God was silent. I won't tell you all that, but I can tell you how it ended. I was walking on the UW campus just praying, "God, give me a sign. God, give me a sign. God, give me a sign." And then walking towards me was a guy wearing a shirt that said, "Signs." Great. Now God is mocking me. And God is mocking me. So I did the only thing that I could think of. I gave in to the marketing, and I went and watched the movie Signs by Mel Gibson that this shirt was referencing. And now I'm going to do something that I don't normally like to do. I'm going to ruin a movie for you. But if you didn't see it by now, you weren't going to see it, and let's be honest, it's not a great movie. So, the movie ends with a priest, Mel Gibson, who has forsaken his faith because he thinks God doesn't exist. It ends with him suddenly putting together all of these signs, all of these life-shaping moments that, when pieced together, prepared him for the moment that he was currently going through, which was defeating space aliens. Now, obviously, I am sitting on my couch watching this. I don't have to defeat space aliens, at least not yet. But I did start to put all the signs together, all the pieces together. The film, the birds, the quiet church, every little moment pieced together. And I saw something. All the while that I've been chasing God, God had been most clearly chasing me. And that conclusion comes from this one question. How many coincidences does it take to make a conspiracy? How many unexplainable things have to happen before you give in to the possibility that there is something working behind the scenes? 2 coincidences? That can happen. What about 50? All around the same thing. All focused on the same thing. How many have to happen before you have to give in that something is going on? Someone is trying to tell you something. There's a poem that probably many of you have heard of called The Hounds of Heaven. And the first verse goes like this. I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind, and in the midst of tears I hid from him, and under running laughter. Up vistaed hopes I sped and shot, precipitated down titanic glooms of chasm fears. From those strong feet that followed after me. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed and majestic instancy, they beat, and a voice beat, more instant than the feet. We spend a great deal of our time trying to find God, wondering where God has gone, shaking our fist at the sky because God has gone silent. All the while, God is chasing us down, tracking us down, working to remind us that we are not alone. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, God is everywhere. God speaks most regularly, and no, I don't know why, in the small moments, the serendipity, the coincidences, the mundane moments that mean the most to us. There is no problem with looking for signs or trying to find God, but realize that God might have different answers for you, different signs than the ones that you think you need. God was clear. I needed to deal with death, and I couldn't avoid it. God wanted me to face that head on. Our gospel for today says, when the Spirit of truth comes, He will guide you into all the truth. Every day, every hour, every moment, God is trying to take you somewhere, trying to shape you, give you a new word that was made just for you. You can run, but the footsteps will follow. You can hide, but you'll find somebody else waiting in your hiding spot, waiting for you. We are not meant to assume that God exists. We are not meant to take what somebody else says about God as our own. We are meant to chase and be chased by the God that is until we know what that God expects of us. Until we know where that God is calling us and we live out that calling. Is it easy? No. Is it safe? Absolutely not. But if you'll do the extra work to kick the tires on a car you're buying, if you'll hire an inspector to look at that new home, what will you do to check out eternity? What will you do to check out what is really there? What will you do to really meet this God that has spent all of your life chasing you? Amen.